Morbid facts about the cast of Stranger Things. Before playing Vecna, Jamie Campbell Bower spiraled into heroin addiction and said he was 1 week away from dying. He's talked about waking up in places he didn't remember, overdosing, and losing control of his life. He eventually entered rehab, got sober, and described the experience as surviving the darkest years of his life. Before Stranger Things made him famous, Joe Keery survived a serious car accident that easily could have killed him. The car flipped and was completely wrecked, and he later said he only walked away because the airbags deployed at the exact right moment. The crash left him shaken for years, realizing how close he'd come to death before anyone knew his name. Gaten Matarazzo was born with cleidocranial dysplasia, a condition so rare it affects less than 1 in a million people. It left him without collarbones, caused severe skull and dental abnormalities, and forced him into repeated surgeries to expose impacted teeth and install prosthetics. The condition itself can cause brittle bones, dangerous airway problems, and lifelong complications. Before Stranger Things, he was rejected from audition after audition for his appearance, but the show ultimately wrote his real disorder into Dustin's character, and Gaten now uses his platform to raise awareness for those living with CCD. Lee Redmond held the world record for the longest fingernails at 28 feet in total length after growing them out for more than 30 years. She said she had to sleep in a special uncomfortable position and couldn't drive because of them. But she eventually lost them after she was ejected from the passenger seat in a 4-car pileup that resulted in serious injuries. For 60 years, an unknown figure dressed in black visited Edgar Allan Poe's grave on his birthday, January 19th. Starting in the 1930s, he would pour himself a glass of cognac and raise a toast in front of the grave, before leaving behind 3 roses and the unfinished bottle of cognac. The man never spoke and was never identified. In 1942, forest rangers discovered something disturbingly odd at a lake located high in the Himalayas. There were over 200 ancient skeletons with blunt force trauma to their skulls, but the strangest part was that they were from distinct populations that died about 1,000 years apart. Researchers say the lake may have served as a recurring death trap over the centuries, with many likely dying from sudden hailstorms, which explains the cracked skulls. Many of the skeletons can still be seen emerging from the thawing ice in the summer, some with their hair and flesh still intact.
Where are you? Probably don't have much time left. Just tell my mom that I love her if I die.
That was the voice of 16-year-old Kyle Plush, heard in his final moments as he slowly died alone in his family's minivan. In April of 2018, Kyle became trapped in a Honda Odyssey in his high school parking lot when the power-folding third-row seat suddenly collapsed, folding forward and pinning him upside down by the chest, neck, and head. The position left him inverted, compressing his lungs and restricting blood flow. For roughly 30 minutes, Kyle called 911 multiple times, calmly but increasingly distressed, telling dispatchers he was trapped and struggling to breathe.
Hello, Cincinnati 911 is the address of the emergency. Cincinnati 911. The Seven Hills what parking lot?
As the pressure worsened, his voice grew weaker and more labored.
Where are you? Probably don't have much time left. Just tell my mom that I love her if I die. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm trapped inside my gold Honda Odyssey van in the Southwest parking lot of Seven Hills Theft. Send officers immediately. I'm almost dead.
His calls were repeatedly misclassified as accidental butt dials, and officers sent to search for him checked the wrong area before leaving. Kyle remained trapped for hours, unable to move, eventually losing consciousness and dying from positional asphyxia. He was later found by his parents, still wedged beneath the folded seat. His death was ruled accidental, but the case exposed serious failures in emergency response and raised lasting concerns about vehicle seat designs and how narrowly Kyle missed being rescued. Visiting a zoo in the late 1980s, Tyson noticed an alpha silverback gorilla bullying all the others. He offered the zookeeper 10 grand to open the gorilla cage so that he could go in there and smash that silverback's snot box. Luckily for the gorilla, the worker declined the offer. Here's a 1997 photo of Las Vegas police facing Mike Tyson after he'd just bitten off the ear of Evander Holyfield. Tyson claimed he was in a primal blacked out state and literally wanted to kill his opponent. Mike had 6 biological children, but his little girl Exodus tragically died when she was only 4 years old. In 2009, Exodus was playing on a treadmill when she accidentally died from strangulation after falling and catching her neck on a power cord. 3 years after signing with Don King, Tyson didn't even know that he had a fan club. When he finally went there, he found a letter from a woman asking if Tyson could call her dying little boy. Tyson immediately called, hung up, cursed out Don King, then started to cry. He said that the call was 1 year too late. In 1979, the King of Persia ordered the execution of 2 servants for being too loud. But since it was a holiday, he postponed their executions by 1 day and made the servants return to their duties. That night, they assassinated the king in his sleep. The FBI estimates that there are between 25 and 50 active serial killers in the US at any given time. When a person is executed by electric chair, they feel everything. They are fully aware of their bodies being fried as it happens in real time. One inmate who survived the first round of electrocution said it tasted exactly like cold peanut butter. A Japanese schoolgirl once died because a teacher crushed her head in the school gate. The principal said it was the student's fault because the gate had to be closed at exactly 8:30 and she was late. Wendell Middlebrooks, the actor who played Kirby on The Sweet Life on Deck, died suddenly at the young age of 36 when a pulmonary embolism tore through his lungs. He was found unconscious and alone in his Los Angeles home, likely collapsing in seconds as the blood clot blocked his oxygen, leaving him with no chance to call for help. Fans remembered him as the goofy security guard and the straight-faced Miller High Life guy, making it all the more tragic that such a wholesome presence was suddenly struck down by a silent killer lurking in his bloodstream. Some people known as bug chasers deliberately try to infect themselves with STDs, most notoriously HIV. Emerging in the late 90s, the subculture revolved around men seeking unprotected intercourse with HIV-positive gift givers. For some, the virus was fetishized as a form of erotic gift, while for others it was seen as inevitable, something to get over with instead of living in fear of. Some even viewed HIV as a mark of belonging to a special community. Interviews revealed participants craving the taboo of a slow, deadly virus invading their body, an act of self-destruction that got them aroused. When Ashton Kutcher was 13, he almost took his own life by jumping off a hospital roof. His twin brother with cerebral palsy only had hours to live if he didn't get a heart transplant, so Ashton wanted to give him his. He was saved when his father and a nurse informed him that his brother had just received a donor. Artist William Udermolen was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 1995. Over the next 5 years, he drew these self-portraits of himself which displayed the devastating effects of the disease. For every waking moment of your life, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, your bones are constantly wet. A woman in the People's Temple cult at Jonestown took a nap before the community committed the largest mass suicide in modern history. She woke up to more than 900 dead bodies scattered around her. A baby girl named Lexi Robbins is slowly turning into a stone due to a rare genetic condition. The incurable illness called FOP gradually turns muscle tissue into bone. During the 1910s, there was an American baseball team completely consisting of death row inmates. As long as they kept winning, their executions were delayed. This is what 28 years of sun damage did to the left side of a trucker's face. This photo taken in 1955 showcases the exact moment a couple realized their 18-month-old son was swept away by the current. The award-winning photographer said this photo deeply affected him for the rest of his life, for he was a father too. In the 1960s, a suicidal woman jumped off the Eiffel Tower and landed on someone's car but somehow survived. She then went on to marry the owner of that car. Playboy model Anna Nicole Smith didn't receive a single penny when her 90-year-old billionaire husband died. Oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall never included her in his will and left his $1.6 billion estate to his son. If you receive the wrong blood type for a transfusion, one of the symptoms is a sense of impending doom. The Roman Emperor Nero accidentally killed his pregnant wife by kicking her to death. He then found a young boy who looked exactly like her, castrated him, and married him. In 1771, a Scottish woman was sentenced to death by hanging for the crime of hiding a pregnancy. Maggie Dixon was hung, declared dead, and carted off in a wooden coffin. She then suddenly woke up on the way to the graveyard and was later released since her sentence had been carried out. She lived for another 40 years, known as Half Hang It Maggie. Through her grandmother Mary, Queen Elizabeth is a direct descendant of Vlad the Impaler. This technically makes Prince Charles the heir to Dracula's bloodline. The urine of a diabetic contains so much sugar that it can be purified and made into a high-end single malt whiskey. Rabies is such a deadly disease that you're more likely to survive being shot in the head. Only 14 people in recorded medical history have ever survived rabies, and all of them suffered permanent brain damage. There are tiny bugs closely related to spiders living in the pores of your face, which crawl onto your face to mate while you're sleeping. In 2006, a team of scientists in Iceland were freezing clams to study the effects of climate change. They ended up accidentally killing the oldest known animal in the world, a 507-year-old ocean quahog clam named Ming. Gary Coleman became a massive star as a child on Different Strokes, earning him millions, but his parents and business advisor embezzled most of his fortune over the years. Once he turned 18, he sued them and won a measly $1.3 million settlement, by which point his career had faded and the medical bills were racking up. As an adult, Coleman struggled financially and battled constant health issues from congenital kidney disease, the condition that resulted in his 4'8" height due to the medications used to treat it when he was a child. His final years were marked by bitterness toward Hollywood and especially his parents. He once said, "If I had the choice, I wouldn't be famous. I'd be a happy, healthy, regular guy." When he suffered a fatal brain hemorrhage after a bad fall in 2010, Coleman had written in his will that he wanted no funeral, no wake, and that his parents should not be informed about or allowed to attend any memorial services held in his honor. Just last week, 19-year-old Serbian model Tajana Radonjic met a horrifying end during what was supposed to be a scenic parasailing shoot off the coast of Montenegro. Suspended 150 feet in the air above the Adriatic Sea, Tajana began to scream, "Put me down," in terror. Then, in a chilling act, she unbuckled her own harness while still in the air and released herself. Onlookers watched helplessly as her body plunged into the ocean below, likely dying immediately. She had received training just minutes before and showed no obvious signs of distress, making her decision to remove the harness all the more disturbing. Many have speculated that she suffered a sudden panic attack and attempted to ground herself while being disassociated from reality. Her body was recovered from the sea hours later, and parts of the incident were caught on video. Her family has disputed the claim that she panicked or acted irrationally, raising questions about the safety of the harness or if she was given improper instructions. Denver Airport's Blue Mustang sculpture is nicknamed Blucifer because of its glowing red eyes. Just before it was unveiled in 2006, Blue Mustang's artist died after a 9,000-pound piece of the sculpture fell on him, adding credence to the theories that Blucifer is haunted or cursed. In 1963, two criminals in Mexico convinced local villagers that they were prophets and demanded worship and tribute. Prostitute Magdalena Solis was paid to imitate an Incan goddess as part of the scam. Suffering from religious delusion, she started to genuinely believe that she was a goddess. She soon took over the cult and started sacrificing her followers and drinking their blood. In 2019, Daniela Lace left a Marilyn Manson concert in Ontario while heavily intoxicated and drove the wrong way down a residential street, crashing into a home and rupturing a gas line. 15 minutes later, the house exploded, destroying 4 homes, injuring 7 people including first responders, and causing an estimated $10 to $15 million in damage. Lace was sentenced to 3 years in prison after pleading guilty to impaired driving causing bodily harm. In a bizarre twist, she and her father later sued the concert venue's alcohol vendor, claiming they were responsible for overseeing her and allowing her to drive drunk. The Bodies exhibit, which displays real human cadavers preserved through plastination, has long been shrouded in controversy due to allegations that many of the bodies were sourced from Chinese prisons without consent. Human rights groups believe that some of the corpses may belong to executed prisoners or political dissidents, including members of persecuted groups like Falun Gong. In 2008, the exhibit's parent company was forced to admit that it couldn't verify the origins of the bodies, posting a disclaimer that some remains may have come from Chinese prisoners. Visitors may unknowingly be viewing the dissected bodies of people who died under horrific conditions. Angelina Jolie was once so depressed that she tried to hire a hitman to kill her. She felt that a murder would be easier on her family than if she took her own life. But the would-be hitman talked her out of it by asking her to wait a month and reconsider her decision. The skin of certain fish species can be grafted onto severe burns and diabetic wounds. The material recruits the body's own cells and is eventually converted into living tissue. According to a recent study, people in the US who were born before 1996 have a lower IQ than those born afterwards. This is due to the negative effects of leaded gasoline, which was finally banned completely on January 1st, 1996. In the late 1980s, a woman went on a vacation getaway where singles could meet other singles. She quickly thought she met the man of her dreams and decided to sleep with him that night. But when she woke up in the hotel room the next morning, the man was gone and there was a small wooden coffin on the table next to her. Inside was a note that read, "You are now HIV positive. Welcome to the world of AIDS." In 1993, Andre the Giant died in a Paris hotel from heart failure related to his untreated acromegaly, the condition that made him so massive in the first place. The 46-year-old wrestler had been in Paris to attend his father's funeral. Edwig was the King of England from 955 to 959. According to history books, he left his coronation feast to have a threesome with his future wife and her mother. He was only 15 at the time. The Altamira Man is an extremely well-preserved fossil of a human that fell down a sinkhole over 100,000 years ago. Discovered in 1993, experts are still working on a way to safely remove the skeleton from the calcite without damaging it. Lieutenant Elmo Dumwalt III died of cancer at age 42 after being exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. It was his father, Admiral Elmo Dumwalt, who initially ordered the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam. An estimated 400,000 people have died from exposure to Agent Orange, while 500,000 babies have suffered birth defects. When she was 16 years old, Annalise Michaels started eating her own hands and drinking her own urine while suffering from seizures and delusions. But her devout Christian family denied medical reasoning and instead blamed the devil. She underwent 67 exorcisms and weighed less than 70 pounds at the time of her negligent death. If you're close enough to a nuclear blast, you'll die with no pain because the explosion will kill you faster than your brain can detect pain. This eerie 1986 Twin Towers advertisement speaks for itself. In 1989, a Los Angeles woman received a phone call from her brother-in-law saying that her ex-husband was on his way to kill her. She dialed 911 but was told nothing could be done unless he showed up at her house. Within 15 minutes, he arrived, killing her and 4 other women who were celebrating her 27th birthday. In October of 2003, a Las Vegas audience watched in horror as Roy Horn of the famed duo Siegfried and Roy was mauled on stage by his own 600-pound white tiger, Manticore. What began as a dazzling birthday performance suddenly turned grim when the animal clamped its jaws around Roy's neck and dragged him off stage, crushing his windpipe and leaving him moments from death. He miraculously survived, but the attack left him partially paralyzed, ending the duo's legendary Vegas run after more than a decade at the Mirage. Roy later claimed he had felt faint during the act and that the tiger was simply trying to protect him, but many believe it was a brutal reminder that even a lifetime of training can't tame a predator's instincts. Singer and model Taylor Moll lives with one of the rarest genetic conditions on Earth, chimerism. While still in the womb, she absorbed her fraternal twin, and today her body carries 2 sets of DNA, her own and that of her lost sibling. The most striking evidence runs straight down her torso, where a sharp line divides 2 different skin tones, one coded by her DNA, the other by her twins. Doctors say she effectively lives with 2 immune systems, making her more prone to health insensitivities and turning her body into a living reminder of the sibling who never survived. In 2007, the Coble family lost their 2 girls and 1 boy in a horrific car accident. A year later, the mother gave birth to triplets, 2 girls and 1 boy. The reason The Beauty and the Beast was written was to help young girls accept arranged marriages. This woman single-handedly buried and gave funerals to more than 40 gay men at the height of the AIDS epidemic. Many victims were never claimed by their families due to stigmas surrounding the disease. 13-year-old Ryan White got AIDS from a blood donor in 1984. He was only given 6 months to live. Even though doctors said he posed absolutely zero risk to students, he was banned from returning to school by a petition signed by 117 parents. An auction was even held to raise funds to keep him out, and a local newspaper that supported him received death threats. The family was forced to leave town when a bullet was shot through the window of their home. Ryan outlived the doctor's diagnosis by 5 years, dying at the age of 19. If you were born prematurely, you can thank this man for your life. In the early 1900s, most physicians believed that premature babies were weaklings that were unfit to survive into adulthood and therefore not worth saving. But a sideshow entertainer named Martin Cooney decided to change that with his innovative incubators he called child hatcheries. He would display premature babies at amusement parks around the world through his exhibit called the Infantorium, where visitors could pay 25 cents to view a room full of glass boxes containing tiny babies. Cooney would use the earnings to work with nurses and doctors to do everything he could to keep the babies alive. His goal was to demonstrate to the public that premature babies could be saved with proper care. Through his efforts, Cooney saved over 7,000 lives, and by 1943, nearly every hospital in America had one of his incubators. His work completely changed the public's perception of premature babies and significantly contributed to the development of modern neonatal care. After the divorce of his parents, Jack Black got mixed in with the wrong crowd and became severely addicted to cocaine at the young age of 14. It got so bad that he would steal money from his mom to fuel his addiction, but was eventually able to kick the habit after switching schools. Jack also lost his gay older brother Howard to AIDS at the height of the epidemic in 1989. In 2009, an Italian brain surgeon was having a heart attack in the middle of performing a delicate operation. But instead of getting treatment, he powered through the surgery upon realizing that his patient may have died if he stopped, and both made a full recovery. In 2009, U.S. Marine Brian Dennis was stationed in Iraq when he met a stray desert dog named Nubs. After someone brutally stabbed the dog with a screwdriver, the Marine nursed him back to health despite expecting him to die. They developed such a strong bond that when the unit left, Nubs picked up Brian's scent and trekked 70 miles through an active desert war zone to be with him. Dennis soon shipped the dog to his home in San Diego, and the two have been best friends ever since. Sculptor Michael Richards was killed in his art studio on the 92nd floor of the North Tower on 9/11. His art ironically focused on planes, including a sculpture of airplanes piercing a cast of his own body. In 1948, Cecil Harris became pinned under his tractor on his Saskatchewan farm. Fearing he may not survive, he used a pocket knife to scratch his will onto part of the tractor. It said, "In case I die in this mess, I leave all to my wife." Once the man died, the will was cut off the tractor and legally accepted in court. Philip Gale was a computer prodigy who was studying at MIT as a sophomore in 1998. One day he wrote on the chalkboard Newton's equation for how an object accelerates as it falls, along with a sketch of a stick figure tossing a chair. He then signed it "Phil was here" before throwing a chair through the window and jumping to his immediate death. After filming Psycho, actress Janet Leigh was so terrified of showers that she only took baths for 35 straight years. On the extremely rare occasion that she did take a shower, she made sure that every door in the house was locked and left the shower curtain open. While filming for Resident Evil 5, there was an accident on set that left 16 people injured. Their zombie costumes were so gory that first responders on the scene had a very difficult time assessing the injuries. The woman who voiced the demon Pazuzu in the original Exorcist had a son who murdered his whole family before turning the gun on himself. He did all of this while wearing a Freddy Krueger mask. Speaking of The Exorcist, one of the actors in the film went on to become an actual serial killer. Paul Bateson, who plays a nurse in the film, eventually confessed to the killing and dismembering of 6 gay men throughout the 1970s. But he was released on parole in 2004 after serving only 5 years in prison. The suit worn by the Cowardly Lion in The Wizard of Oz was made out of real lion skin and fur. Several lions were killed in order to make the costume look as realistic as possible. In 2012, a woman from New York donated her kidney to save the life of her boss. The boss then fired her when she took too long to recover from the operation. A British Royal Marine had a leg tattoo of Liverpool's motto, "You'll never walk alone." But after a major injury in Afghanistan, his leg was amputated. The surgeon had to cut the tattoo so it now read, "You'll never walk." Here are some morbid facts about your favorite stars from Nickelodeon. After losing 125 pounds as a teenager, Josh Peck turned to drugs and alcohol as his new vices. He recently revealed that he was high on a buffet of drugs including cocaine and prescription pills while filming seasons 3 and 4 of Drake and Josh. But Peck soon realized he developed a reputation in Hollywood for being unstable and erratic and has remained sober since 2008. When Brian Peck was on trial for sexually abusing Drake Bell in 2003, there were 41 letters written to the judge by friends, family, and colleagues who were defending Peck's character. Some claim that Peck must have been facing major temptation or had been pressured and pushed beyond belief to have committed any of the abuse. Drake and Josh director Rich Coral and stage manager Beth Coral both allegedly wrote letters in Peck's defense, with Rich saying it would be his pleasure to work with Brian again. In 2016, a man who'd been continuously stalking Miranda Cosgrove apparently plotted to murder her. For 3 days, the stalker had been burying various weapons in Cosgrove's backyard, including knives and a rope. One day, he spent hours pacing around the area and eventually shot at a woman who looked like Miranda. The man then performed self-immolation before turning the gun on himself right in Cosgrove's yard. Miranda has stated that she still lives in the same home but refuses to stay there alone ever since that traumatic incident. Jeanette McCurdy has described the relationship she had with her mother Deborah as both emotionally and sexually abusive. When Jeanette was 3 years old, her mom was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent multiple surgeries. As a result, Deborah would perform routine vaginal and breast exams on Jeanette and never allowed her to shower alone until she turned 17. McCurdy says that her mother was obsessed with making her a star and introduced her to a calorie restriction by age 11, leading to various eating disorders that Jeanette still struggles with, including anorexia and bulimia. McCurdy says that she refused to appear in the revival series of iCarly only because she didn't want to be reminded of her mother's abuse during the original show. In 2022, Jeanette released a book entitled I'm Glad My Mom Died 9 years after she passed away from breast cancer. After being a massive Nickelodeon star in the 90s and early 2000s since the age of 10, Amanda Bynes faced a public downfall after retiring from acting in 2009. She began raising eyebrows when she received a DUI upon crashing into a police cruiser in 2012. After being released, she was arrested several more times for DUIs, holding up traffic, and hit and runs until her license was finally suspended. In May of 2013, officers arrested Bynes once again for reckless endangerment, amid reports that she threw a bong out the window of her New York City apartment. A few months later, she was sent to a psychiatric hospital after starting a fire at the end of someone's driveway in California. Soon afterwards, Bynes announced that she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and conservatorship was granted to her parents. The 38-year-old now goes by the name Midge Gardiner and is completely unrecognizable. The Grinch as a kid was played by an 18-year-old actor with dwarfism who was barely 3 feet tall. Sadly, he died of heart failure just 2 years after the movie was released. A woman posted this photo to Reddit to show the progression of Alzheimer's through her mother's crocheting. From left to right, the squares show her mother's decline over a 2-year span. When the mummy of Ramses II was transported to France in 1974, it was issued an Egyptian passport that listed his occupation as deceased king. A designer of the Titanic named Thomas Andrews was on board as it sank. His original design included more safety features such as watertight compartments and twice as many lifeboats. But his ideas were rejected because others thought that the extra safety features would make the ship look ugly. He spent his last moments helping to evacuate passengers and his body was never recovered. In 2015, 16-year-old Indiana teenager Brock Meister survived a cancerous brain tumor. 6 years later, Brock was the passenger in a car accident that left him internally decapitated, meaning his skull was completely severed from his spine. This injury is almost always fatal, but Brock's friends managed to keep his head stabilized and he miraculously survived once again. Amazingly, the same neurologist saved him from both the tumor and decapitation. Madagascar's Senate recently approved a new law that will allow for chemical and sometimes surgical castration of those found guilty of assaulting a minor. In 1998, an elementary school in Aurora, Colorado started buying slaves in Sudan to free them. They managed to raise over $35,000, allowing them to purchase and free up to 750 slaves. This gained global attention, with schools all over the world soon starting slave buyback programs, but only until it became clear that the money was only helping slavery grow. During King Leopold II's personal rule over the Congo Free State, forced labor and terror were used to extract rubber for profit. When workers failed to meet rubber quotas, punishment was systematic and brutal, with hands or entire limbs cut off as a warning. morning. Soldiers often mutilated or killed the workers' wives and children as well, using family terror to force compliance from entire families. The regime led to the deaths of millions through execution, starvation, disease, and torture, making it one of the most horrific colonial atrocities in history. In 2004, a massive fire broke out at the Yacua Bolaños supermarket in Paraguay during a busy shopping day. As smoke and flames spread, multiple exits were reportedly locked to prevent customers from fleeing with unpaid merchandise, trapping hundreds of people inside. The fire ended up killing more than 400 people, many from smoke inhalation while pressed against sealed doors. Investigators later confirmed severe safety violations, and several owners and employees were convicted, making it one of the deadliest fires in history and a stark example of profit being prioritized over human life. This was the last photo taken of Marie Joseph before she drowned in the swimming pool shown. Due to the cloudy water, her body wasn't found for 2 days, during which time people continued swimming in the pool, unaware that Marie's body was decomposing beneath them. In 2011, scientists conducted an experiment to find out what's inside the average human belly button. One individual who hadn't bathed in years hosted 2 species of bacteria that are typically only found in ice caps and thermal vents. In the year 2000, an orca whale killed a great white shark off the coast of California. According to satellite tags, the smell of the dead shark's carcass apparently caused all nearby great whites to suddenly vanish. One shark that was in the region immediately dove down 500 meters and swam straight to Hawaii without stopping. At age 25, a woman named Blanche Monnier had her heart set on marrying a lawyer that her mother wasn't too fond of. When she disappeared one day, most assumed that she had simply run off with him. But 25 years later, someone sent local authorities an anonymous letter saying her mother was holding her hostage. When they arrived at the home, they found Blanche bound and starving in the attic. Dying is forbidden in the town of Longyearbyen, Norway, or at least, you won't be buried there. The town's only cemetery closed over 70 years ago because it's so cold that the bodies buried there previously never decomposed. The problem is that some corpses still carry traces of the Spanish flu virus that killed up to 50 million people worldwide around 100 years ago. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary Vincent was hitchhiking in California when she was picked up by 56-year-old Larry Singleton. The man eventually knocked her out with a sledgehammer and sexually assaulted her that night. The next day, he cut off both her arms with a hatchet and threw her into a ditch to die. But Mary managed to pack her stumps with blood to stop the bleeding and spent all night crawling out. She eventually made it to the highway and started walking, naked and covered in blood. The first car that saw her sped away in horror. The second car was a couple on their honeymoon who picked her up and she survived. Singleton was sentenced to 14 years in prison but was released 6 years early due to good behavior. He would go on to murder a different woman named Roxanne Hayes a few years later. In the 1960s, Micheal Jackson's father Joseph wanted to teach his kids a lesson about leaving the windows open at night. So one night when little Michael was asleep, his father climbed through his window wearing a mask and screamed at him. From that point on, Michael would have recurring nightmares about being kidnapped from his bedroom. According to a survey, more than half of all commercial pilots have fallen asleep during a flight. 29% of these pilots claim they've woken up before and seen the co-pilot asleep as well. In 2010, a Polish man wanted doctors to remove a years-long cyst on the back of his head. Upon further examination, doctors found that the cyst was actually a .22 caliber bullet lodged in his scalp. He hadn't noticed it because he was drunk at the party where he was likely shot 5 years earlier. In 2009, spelunker John Jones was caving with some friends and family in the Nutty Putty Cave in Utah. About an hour into the expedition, John decided to find the route known as the Birth Canal, an extremely narrow passage that spelunkers must crawl through carefully if they dare. After finding what he thought was the birth canal, he crawled in head first and started inching his way forward. But John would soon realize that this wasn't the birth canal, since it was way tighter than anything safe to crawl through. By this point, John didn't even have room to wiggle out the way he came, so his only option was to push forward. Over the next 27 hours, hundreds of rescuers failed to pull John out of the crevice. At some point, John died from cardiac arrest and his body was never retrieved. And the Nutty Putty Cave has been sealed off ever since. In 1991, a decomposing woman was found hanging from a shower in a New Mexico motel room. Despite an image of her being found in the room, she and the man in the photo still remain unidentified to this day. Her first name is believed to be Becca, only thanks to an anonymous tip given to police in 2021. The animal that causes the most deaths in the US annually is deer. This is due to them blindly running into roadways, resulting in an estimated 200 deaths per year. The runner-up is bees, wasps, and hornets, accounting for around 60 deaths annually. Tennessee man James Washington was always the prime suspect of a 1995 murder, but there was never sufficient evidence to charge him. That was until 2012 when he was having a heart attack and confessed to the murder since he believed he was on his deathbed. But he ended up recovering and was convicted based on this confession, which he later tried to take back. Here are some morbidly wholesome facts about John Cena. John Cena holds the all-time record for the most Make-A-Wish visits by far, personally granting over 650 wishes for children with life-threatening illnesses. Many of these visits have taken place in intensive care units or hospice settings, oftentimes with children who would pass away weeks or even days later. Hospital staff have said Cena routinely stays far longer than scheduled, sitting with families after cameras are gone, letting kids talk about fear, death, or unfinished dreams while he stayed fully in character as their hero. He's never publicized these encounters himself and refuses to use them for branding, saying he sees them as his life's purpose rather than for charity. Cena has also privately supported veterans suffering from severe PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, including meeting wounded soldiers who believed their lives were over due to permanent disabilities. Several veterans later said those conversations with the wrestling legend single-handedly saved their life. Cena has consistently avoided receiving any public credit for these interactions. This is a photo of Anne Frank's father, Otto, revisiting the attic where they hid from the Nazis. Sadly, he was the only surviving member of the family as his two daughters died just weeks before their camp was liberated. In 1783, a boy was born with two heads, but one of the heads was upside down. Surprisingly, the other head was somewhat functional, and the boy even claimed that he could hear the other brain talking to him. Tigers are some of the most vengeful animals on the planet and will take revenge on anyone who has wronged them. In 1997, a Russian poacher shot a tiger and left him for dead before stealing part of his meal. The tiger later found the poacher's cabin and waited 12 hours for him to arrive before killing and eating him. Sonny Graham was dying of heart failure when he got the call about a new heart. The donor was 33-year-old Terry Cottle, who had just committed suicide by shooting himself in the throat with a shotgun. After a successful transplant, Sonny started writing to Terry's widow, Cheryl. The two ended up falling in love and getting married. Soon, people started to notice that Sonny was taking on some of Terry's personality and characteristics. He started liking things that he never enjoyed before, like beer and hot dogs, which were some of Terry's favorites. 12 years later, Sonny committed suicide the exact same way as Terry, with a shotgun to the throat. In 1972, Neil Armstrong visited the town of Langholm, Scotland. When he got there, he was read a 400-year-old law declaring that any Armstrong found in the town should be hanged. This is a high-resolution image of stitches in the eye after a corneal transplant. Thanks to the National Association for the Preservation of Skin Art, you can leave your tattoos behind after you die. After the funeral home has removed your tattooed skin, the organization will preserve it in a frame and send it to your loved ones. This is a photo of Benjamin, the last known Tasmanian tiger, at the Hobart Zoo in 1936. The species officially went extinct when Benjamin was locked outside of his sleeping quarters on a cold Tasmanian night and froze to death. In 1983, professional climber Dan Goodwin illegally climbed the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He was trying to bring attention to the inability to rescue trapped occupants in the upper levels of skyscrapers. Out of 343 firefighters who perished on 9/11, Daniel Sir was the first. He died when a woman who jumped from one of the towers landed on him. Only one non-military plane was allowed to fly after all commercial flights were forced to land. It was delivering anti-venom to a snake handler in Florida who was bitten by the extremely venomous taipan snake. The only off-duty NYPD officer who was killed in 9/11 had signed his retirement papers that morning. But instead of leaving his badge, John William Perry decided to pick it up one last time. 1957, two young sisters in England, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, were killed instantly when a speeding car suddenly struck them during their walk to church. Their parents were shattered by the loss, but a year later they had twin daughters, Jillian and Jennifer, who as they grew began showing strange overlaps with the former girls' lives, recognizing toys they'd never seen, describing places they'd never visited, and developing an intense fear of cars. Jennifer was reportedly even born with birthmarks in the same locations as Jacqueline's. The memories eventually faded, but the Pollock twins became one of the most cited cases in discussions of childhood reincarnation, with some people believing it was true reincarnation, and others arguing it was grief, suggestion, or outright coincidence. A 6-year-old boy from Missouri was subjected to a staged kidnapping orchestrated by his own family to teach him a lesson about stranger danger. Police say an aunt's coworker lured him into a truck, told him he'd never see his mother again, and threatened to nail him to the wall of a shed. When he started sobbing, the man showed him a handgun and ordered him to stop crying. Investigators say he tied the boy's hands and feet, covered his face, and drove him around for hours while the child begged to go home. Once back at the house, relatives brought him into the basement and kept the act going, lecturing him about strangers while he was still terrified and restrained. Multiple adults were later charged after authorities said the ordeal caused genuine trauma, inflicted by the very people meant to protect him. This was the real-life Mean Girls, only instead of high school drama, it ended in unspeakable horror. When 12-year-old Shanda Scherer opened her front door one January night in 1992, she had no idea she was walking into one of the most horrific murder plots in Indiana history. Shortly after Shanda moved into town, classmate Melinda Loveless, jealous over Shanda's relationship with Loveless's ex-girlfriend, lured Shanda from her home under false pretenses with the help of 3 female accomplices. At a remote site called the Witch's Castle, they stripped, beat, and stabbed Shanda several times, inflicting painful but non-fatal wounds. Shanda, still alive, was forced into a car trunk and endured hours of torture, including burns from a cigarette lighter and a brutal sexual assault with a tire tool, causing severe physical trauma. The next morning, the group doused the conscious but weakened girl with gasoline and set her on fire, as she eventually died from thermal injuries and smoke inhalation. Her charred body was found in a field later that day, and the 4 perpetrators were arrested after one of the accomplices boasted to peers. Perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire case is that as of October of 2025, all of the perpetrators are now free, including the ringleader Melinda Loveless, who was released on parole in 2019. Jack Black's teenage years were marked by addiction long before fame entered his life. After his parents divorced, he began stealing money from his mom to buy cocaine at just 14 years old, spiraling into substance abuse while still practically a child. The addiction took hold during a period of instability and isolation, but he later thanked a non-judgmental school therapist with helping to pull him back from it. Jack ultimately got sober as a teenager, avoided relapsing as his career took off, and has spoken openly about how early intervention likely saved his life. In 1986, a Yakuza member attempting to smuggle a live hand grenade onto a flight from Manila to Osaka nearly took down the whole plane by accident. While hiding in the airport bathroom, the grenade's safety pin came loose, and in a moment of panic, the man abandoned it and fled back to his seat. Seconds later, the grenade exploded inside the aircraft, blasting a hole in the fuselage and resulting in rapid decompression. The explosion injured 109 passengers, but the plane somehow remained airborne long enough to make an emergency landing, narrowly avoiding what could have been one of the deadliest aviation attacks of the decade. Investigators later revealed that the man wasn't immediately arrested because he'd been badly injured in the blast. When the explosion ruptured a hydraulic line, hot oil sprayed all over his body, leaving him with severe burns that required immediate hospitalization before he was taken into custody. In July of 2023, Australian woman Erin Patterson invited her ex-in-laws and their relatives over for lunch, serving them a homemade beef Wellington laced with one of the deadliest fungi on Earth, death cap mushrooms. Within a few days, 3 of them were dead from agonizing organ failure, and a 4th barely survived after a liver transplant. Patterson claimed it was a tragic accident, but investigators found damning evidence, including a food dehydrator tied to the poison and inconsistent stories about where the mushrooms came from. She was recently convicted of 3 counts of murder and likely faces life in prison. In the mid-1800s, women across the Western world wore massive crinolines, hoop skirts that ballooned outward in all directions, often made from highly flammable fabrics like cotton. The size made them elegant but deadly. They caught fire easily near candles or fireplaces, and the sheer width made them nearly impossible to escape the flames. Within just 2 months in 1863, 19 English women burnt to death after their dresses caught fire. By the end of the decade, more than 3,000 people had died as a result of crinoline fires. On June 5, 1986, 24-year-old New York City model Marla Hanson was asked by her landlord Stephen Roth to meet outside a Manhattan bar to collect an $850 security deposit he owed her. As they walked away, Hanson was ambushed by two men Roth had hired. One attacker restrained her head while the other slashed her face with razor blades, carving deep wounds across her cheeks as Roth stood by and watched. The attack required more than 150 stitches, leaving her with permanent disfigurement that effectively ended her modeling career. Hanson survived after extensive reconstructive surgery, and investigators later determined that Roth had ordered the attack after she rejected his romantic advances. He and the two attackers were convicted and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Hanson said the trauma continued in court, where a defense attorney subjected her to a vicious and humiliating cross-examination, attacking her credibility, accusing her of manipulating men, and suggested she had falsely identified her attackers due to her being racist, an experience she described as worse than the physical attack itself. In October of 2024, Micah Smith took his three young children, ages 2, 4, and 8, on a 9-mile hike in Utah that authorities described as extremely difficult and dangerous, especially as a major storm was rolling in. Court records say Smith failed to check the weather and continued climbing, even after sending photos of the incoming storm to his wife, who urged him to turn back. Investigators say he refused, later telling police he was comfortable hiking in the dark without lights. By the time they reached the summit around 6 p.m., hail and snow had started falling. The family began descending, but only made it about 600 feet before one child fell and struck their head. At that point, Smith decided to shelter in place overnight with the children, despite worsening weather and inadequate clothing. During the night, prosecutors say the children repeatedly said they were cold, exhausted, and wanted to go home. One child allegedly begged Smith to turn back earlier, saying she was afraid she might not survive, but he refused, calling the hike a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Court documents state Smith later claimed he performed CPR on his son overnight and instructed his daughter to continue the CPR before leaving his children behind. When search and rescue teams located Smith the next day, he was all alone and appeared completely unconcerned about his kids, telling responders he believed one of his children was already dead. A helicopter crew later found the three children together, severely hypothermic and inadequately clothed. All three children ultimately survived, though two were in critical condition, and one had a core body temperature of 63 degrees Fahrenheit that led to a stroke and emergency brain surgery. Smith was later charged with aggravated child abuse and child torture, with prosecutors requesting no bail, arguing he repeatedly chose to continue, despite warnings from the children, their mother, and the worsening weather. This was the horrifying moment when Jane Goodall uncovered the savage truth behind chimpanzees. In the 1970s, Goodall and her team witnessed a shocking 4-year conflict known today as the Gombe Chimpanzee War. A single chimp community in Tanzania split into two rival factions, and the carnage that followed shattered the long-held belief that chimps were peaceful creatures. The war started when 6 males ambushed a lone rival and tore him to shreds, and over the next few years, the stronger group carried out coordinated raids in which every male of the weaker side was hunted down and killed in brutal fashion. Females were beaten, kidnapped, and often murdered until the losing community was completely wiped out. For Goodall, who had once described her chimps as gentle and idyllic, the violence was devastating. She admitted to having constant nightmares about the carnage and about watching individuals she had known since infancy transform into cold-blooded killers. The scientific world was equally shaken. The war revealed that chimpanzees, like humans, are capable not only of affection and cooperation, but also of organized warfare, murder, and ruthless extermination. There's a surgery so incredibly bizarre that's called tooth and eye surgery. Known medically as osteoodontokeratoprosthesis, it's a last resort operation for people with severe corneal blindness. Surgeons remove one of the patient's canine teeth, root and jawbone included, hollow it out, and fit it with a tiny plastic lens. The bizarre implant is first stitched underneath the skin of the cheek for months, where it swells, fuses with flesh, and even grows its own blood supply before it's transplanted into the blind eye. Surgeons describe the moment of implantation as one of the most surreal in medicine, sliding a blood-soaked tooth back out of the cheek and into the empty cornea. The body is far less likely to reject the implant if it's made from the patient's own living tissue, making a tooth the ideal durable anchor. The result is an unsettling image, a tooth visibly embedded in the white of the eye with a lens peeking through like a peephole. but it's restored vision to people thought to be permanently blind, sometimes after decades in darkness. In the early 1930s, New York high society had an unlikely new it girl, a mannequin named Cynthia. Designed by artist Lester Gaba, she was so lifelike that designers dressed her in couture. She was photographed at parties and even received fan mail like a real celebrity. For years, people treated her like she was actually alive. But in 1938, Cynthia toppled from a chair and shattered into pieces, and newspapers reported her death with obituaries as though a beloved socialite had just passed away. In the early 1980s, Minneapolis was haunted by the weepy-voiced killer, a man who routinely phoned police after his murders, sobbing and begging them to stop him. For years, his trembling voice was the only lead. That changed in 1982 when he lured sex worker Denise Williams into his car and stabbed her 15 times with a screwdriver. But Williams fought back, smashing a glass bottle over his head and escaping. Bleeding and panicked, he later called 911 for medical help, and detectives immediately recognized the same weepy voice from the anonymous murder call. He was identified as Paul Michael Stefani and sentenced to life. Eddy Murphy's childhood was shaped by sudden violence long before he became famous. When he was about 7 years old, his biological father, Charles Edward Murphy, was shot and killed during a domestic dispute involving his girlfriend. The killing abruptly removed his father from his life, leaving Murphy and his brother to grow up without him. The loss is rarely mentioned in discussions of his personal life, and Murphy himself has rarely addressed it publicly. In 2025, 35-year-old Michael Virgil died on board a Royal Caribbean cruise after allegedly being served more than 30 alcoholic drinks in a single day, according to a wrongful death lawsuit filed by his family. Court filings state that Virgil showed clear signs of severe intoxication before experiencing a violent outburst, during which he became disoriented and aggressive. Crew members restrained him as his condition worsened, and he later collapsed. Virgil was eventually pronounced dead on board, and his body was stored in the ship's refrigerated morgue until the vessel returned to port. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner later ruled his death a homicide, citing acute alcohol intoxication and restraint-related factors, and his family is seeking accountability from the cruise line for alleged over-serving and failures in response. This was the moment when an off-duty police officer in Barcelona realized something was seriously wrong at a subway station. A young man on the platform appeared disoriented and unsteady, drifting dangerously close to the edge in a station where trains arrive every few minutes. The officer, later identified as Felisa Pozas, was off-duty but immediately recognized the risk. She walked to an emergency SOS intercom and pressed the button to alert Metro Control that someone needed help. But seconds later, the situation escalated as the man suddenly lost his balance and fell onto the tracks below. Without hesitating, Pozas ran toward him as several nearby commuters rushed in to help. Working against the clock, they grabbed him and hoisted him back onto the platform, knowing a train could enter the station at any moment. No one was seriously injured, and authorities later confirmed the man was not intoxicated. No further details about his condition have been released, but officials say the outcome could have easily been fatal if not for Pozas' awareness, her decision to act immediately, and the fact that she didn't wait for someone else to step in. This woman's life has been changed forever by a random horrific attack that lasted only a few seconds. 46-year-old Ashley Wazalewski was suddenly attacked without warning while walking near Forsyth Park in Savannah, Georgia, after attending a Christmas program at a nearby church on December 10, 2025. A stranger had approached her from behind and poured a corrosive chemical directly over her head, causing immediate catastrophic burns. The liquid ate through her clothing, burned deep into her skin, and was so caustic it melted a key fob in her pocket as it spread across her body. She suffered second and third degree burns over more than half her body, including her face and scalp, and began screaming as her clothes started burning off her skin. The attacker didn't take anything from her and simply fled the scene within seconds. A good Samaritan rushed in to help as she wailed in agony and called her family. Wazalewski was quickly transferred to the Augusta Burn Center, where doctors say recovery will involve prolonged hospitalization, multiple surgeries, and permanent scarring. As of the latest updates, the attacker has not yet been identified or arrested. In 1966, 17-year-old Franca Viola became the center of one of Italy's most disturbing criminal traditions, the matrimonio reparatore, a so-called rehabilitating marriage, where a rapist could escape prosecution by marrying his victim. Franca was kidnapped by Filippo Melodia and held captive for 8 days, during which she was repeatedly assaulted as Melodia and his accomplices tried to force her into the marriage that would legally erase his crimes. But Franca did something that no woman in Italy had ever done before. She said no. Her refusal didn't just defy her attacker, it defied the entire legal system, the cultural norms of her town, and the centuries-old belief that a woman's honor could be restored by marrying the man who raped her. When Franca and her family pressed charges instead, the community turned on them. Their property was burned, they were publicly shamed, and they lived under constant threats for refusing to participate in the ritual that protected rapists. Melodia was eventually convicted of kidnapping, rape, and intimidation, but the law that allowed rapists to walk free by marrying their victims remained in place for another 15 years. Article 544, the clause that effectively turned sexual assault into a negotiable family arrangement, was finally repealed in 1981. While preparing for his Joker role in Suicide Squad, Jared Leto tried so hard to be edgy that he terrified his own castmates. He reportedly mailed them a dead pig, bullets, pornographic objects, and even a live rat. Some actors also claimed he sent used condoms, though Leto denied this, but multiple sources insist the gifts were so revolting that people genuinely felt unsafe around him. Despite all of his extreme method acting, most of Leto's scenes didn't even make the final movie, and when it finally came out, fans and critics agreed his Joker was one of the worst interpretations ever put on screen. In 1937, 20-year-old Patricia Douglas was hired for what she thought was a film job, only to be taken to a booze-filled MGM party where she was forced to drink and brutally raped by a salesman inside a car. Instead of taking hush money, she did the unthinkable for the era. She filed a lawsuit against MGM, publicly accusing the studio of covering up the crime. But she would find out the hard way that MGM was untouchable. They paid off witnesses, falsified medical records, smeared her as a drunken prostitute, stalked her, and blacklisted her from Hollywood. The case was dismissed, the press mocked her, and her life was completely destroyed. Patricia vanished from the public eye, and Hollywood buried her story for nearly 70 years, until the truth was finally uncovered after she died in 2003. 1968, 20-year-old college student Barbara Jane Micheal was bedridden with the flu in a Georgia motel, unaware that two strangers had been stalking her and planned one of the most sadistic kidnappings in U.S. history. At 4 a.m., there was a knock at the door. A man dressed as a police officer stood outside with a badge, claiming Barbara's boyfriend had been in a serious car accident and was asking for her. But it was a calculated lie. The kidnappers had researched her personal life, knew her boyfriend's name, and used emotional manipulation to get her mother to open the door. The second they stepped inside, the disguise dropped. The man pulled a gun. His female accomplice used chloroform on her mother, and Barbara was tackled to the ground. As they tied her up and dragged her away, they said that if she screamed or fought back, they would kill her boyfriend. Sick, terrified, and believing her silence was the only way to protect him, Barbara didn't resist as they shoved her into a car and drove deep into the woods. There, the kidnappers revealed something even more twisted. They had built a custom coffin for Barbara, just 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 3 feet high, equipped with a dim light, a fan, and water laced with sedatives to keep her weak and compliant. Before sealing the lid, they snapped a Polaroid of her trapped inside, holding a sign that said kidnapped, then buried her alive under the dirt. Alone with the flu in total darkness, Barbara could barely move as the fan buzzed weakly. Insects crawled across her skin, and she prayed that the air wouldn't run out. The kidnappers then contacted her father, Robert F. Micheal, a millionaire real estate tycoon, and demanded $500,000 in cash, one of the largest ransom demands in U.S. history. Despite FBI warnings, her father personally paid the ransom, driving the money himself while federal agents hid in his trunk. But after they took the cash, the kidnappers ran off without revealing where she was buried, leaving the FBI racing to locate a hidden grave in miles of forest while Barbara was slowly suffocating underground. For 83 agonizing hours, she lay buried alive, hallucinating from fear and sedatives. At one point, rainwater began leaking into the coffin and she was prepared to drown. When the FBI finally captured the kidnapper and forced him to talk, agents dug frantically through the dirt until they heard faint knocking from below. They ripped the lid open, and a trembling, dirt-covered Barbara whispered, "You're the most beautiful sight I've ever seen." Her kidnapper, Gary Christ, was sentenced to life but paroled after just 10 years, became a doctor, and was later arrested again for smuggling drugs. MF Doom, the masked supervillain of hip-hop, died in a way just as mysterious as the persona he created. On Halloween Day in 2020, he passed away at 49, but his death was kept completely secret for 62 days. For 2 months, fans continued listening to his music and waiting for new projects, unaware that he was already gone. Then on New Year's Eve, his wife quietly announced his passing, but gave no cause of death or any further details. To this day, the circumstances remain undisclosed, sparking endless speculation. It felt strangely fitting. Doom built his entire identity around mystery and anonymity, sometimes even sending imposters to perform in his place. In the end, he died on Halloween, vanished in silence, and left behind one final mystery. In 1929, 6-year-old Carl Newton Mahan became the youngest person in American history to be charged with murder, then sat in a courtroom playing with a doll. The Kentucky boy had gotten into a fight with an 8-year-old named Cecil Van Hoos over a piece of scrap metal. Cecil reportedly slapped him, so Carl ran home, grabbed his father's shotgun, and blasted the older boy, killing him instantly. Because of the shocking nature of the crime, Carl was actually put on trial for murder, sitting in the courtroom so young that they had to give him toys to keep him calm. The jury found him guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 15 years in reform school, but the conviction was quickly overturned due to public outrage. This haunting photo shows an early radiation therapy session from the 1930s when doctors used x-rays to burn away skin diseases or tumors with terrifyingly primitive equipment. The patient's head was clamped perfectly still so doctors could fire high-dose radiation at specific areas of the face. Because the dangers of radiation were barely understood, patients often suffered brutal side effects, severe burns, scarring, hair loss, blindness, and even cancer years later. In some cases, radiation was even used to treat acne or blemishes, causing far more damage than the condition itself. In May of 1973, a man walked into a bank in Ontario with a rifle and a bomb wired inside his own mouth. The device was connected to a dead man's switch, meaning if he released the pressure or was killed, it would immediately explode. He calmly took hostages and demanded money, claiming there was another larger bomb hidden inside the bank. When he tried to leave the building with a bag of cash, police snipers opened fire. The moment he was hit, the switch released, detonating the bomb in his mouth and blowing up his head and upper body in front of everyone. Investigators later found a second device inside the bank containing 200 sticks of dynamite that could have wiped out the entire building, but it was luckily defused. The man carried several fake IDs and was so badly mutilated that he's never been identified. This might be the most awful case I've ever covered, especially since it happened just 30 minutes from where I live. In July of 2007, the quiet town of Cheshire, Connecticut was rocked by one of the most disturbing home invasions in U.S. history, when two men followed Jennifer Hawk Pettit and her 11-year-old daughter Michaela home from the grocery store and returned that night to break into the family's house. Dr. William Pettit was savagely beaten with a baseball bat and tied up in the basement, while Jennifer and her daughters Michaela and 17-year-old Haley were bound upstairs and held captive for hours while the intruders roamed freely throughout the home. At dawn, Jennifer was forced to withdraw $15,000 from a bank, quietly alerting a teller that her family was being held hostage, but police who surrounded the home decided to wait rather than storm the house. Inside, the terror escalated. Jennifer was killed, Michaela was left tied to her bed after being subject to unthinkable abuse, and gasoline was poured throughout the home, on the floors, on furniture, and even on the girls themselves before the intruders set the house on fire. Jennifer's body was discovered on the first floor, while Haley and Michaela, still bound, died of smoke inhalation as flames consumed their rooms. Against all odds, William managed to escape barefoot and bloodied through the basement, crawling to a neighbor's yard as the only survivor of the family. The two attackers crashed the family's SUV while fleeing and were arrested immediately, later sentenced to death for one of the most infamous crimes in Connecticut history. Sentences eventually reduced to life after the state abolished capital punishment. Adding to the horror, one of the killers later tried to deflect blame by calling William a coward and suggesting his failure to act was the real reason why his wife and daughters died. Charlie Kirk's alleged shooter is in custody, and here's what we know so far. On September 10, 2025, conservative activist Charlie Kirk was gunned down while speaking at Utah Valley University, the fatal shot tearing through his neck from nearly 200 yards away. Police say the assassin was 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, a Utah man whose own father recognized him in surveillance photos and turned him in. Investigators found he had crept onto the roof of the Losi Center with a bolt-action rifle fitted with a scope, leaving behind eerie forensic traces like palm marks, boot prints, and imprints where his arm braced the gun. Even more disturbing were the shell casings scattered at the scene, one taunting, "Hey fascists, catch," while others were engraved with bizarre memes. Robinson also allegedly talked about retrieving a rifle from a bush, wrapping it in a towel, and engraving bullets in online Discord messages. Kirk collapsed on stage in front of a crowd of panicked students, bleeding out as security dragged him away. He died en route to the hospital, while Robinson was captured the next day and now faces multiple felony charges, including aggravated murder in what authorities are calling a targeted political assassination. But key questions still remain. How long Robinson planned the shooting, exactly how he obtained the rifle, and whether anyone else knew of his intentions beyond cryptic online posts. Officials say he acted alone, yet his mix of political slogans, meme-like engravings, and anti-fascist references leave investigators and the public still searching for a clear motive beyond his political anger toward Charlie Kirk.